my name is Dana Ausbrooks. I'm the attorney for Williamson County Schools.
I'm Carol Hendlmyer. I'm the Director of Student Support Services.
And this afternoon we are going to talk about the State Department of Education 48-hour draft update. You're going to have one question and we're going to give you the answer up front. And it is, number one question, what's the effective date? March 12th, 2019. So you're going to think about that for a second, and the next question you're going to have is, what happens if I already have an IEP scheduled on March 12th, 2019? Because I guarantee somebody has one. So I'm going to recommend, if there is an IEP already scheduled for March 12th, 2019, go ahead and try to get that draft to the parents 48 hours beforehand. If you are a lucky school that does not have an IEP scheduled currently on March 12th, 2019, let's not schedule one, okay? But that is your effective date. So what does that mean? So the next couple of slides, we are going to talk about the nuts and bolts of the law. One thing that Carol's office has already provided to you, and you will see it in your folder, is a PDF of frequently asked questions from the Department of Education and the rule itself. So the rule is labeled parent participation. And as we talk today, please try to remember our goal is parent participation. As a district, we do a phenomenal job of making sure that our parents are part of our team and are active participants. Let's look at this new rule not as a barrier, but as an opportunity for us to continue to work together. With that being said, you are going to hear Carol and I, as we go through this adventure, talk about our 10-day notice. And remember, this is our starting point. 10-day notice goes out first. Then we negotiate the date. So step one in this process, you've got to notify the parent or legal guardian, 10-day notice, all right? And that is at least 10 school days before the IEP meeting. Some of us are doing that, some of us are not. But as a district, number one, that is a compliance issue for us. When we are audited, that is our number one audit finding. So we're gonna take care of two issues, make the audit finding better and communicate with our parents. If the parent is not available, we can then negotiate the date. But let's send that 10-day notice first. Parent meeting notification, here's why it's so important. It's going to tell the parent that they can decline their right to receive a copy of the draft IEP. So, and you're gonna notice, this is pulled directly from that new rule. All right, 10-day notice. I'm going to give you the next question. What does that mean? It means it's in case you're not sure, it's actually what's generated at Ed Plan, okay? We're always going to generate that notice meeting first, then negotiate the date for the meeting with the parent. All right, here's the other important piece from the new rule. That parent needs to provide us with written notice declining their right to receive an IEP. Not verbal, not in the car rider line, hey, can you let somebody know this? We need written notice, because if we don't have that written notice, we have got to make that IEP draft available to the parent or guardian 48 hours prior to the scheduled meeting time. The other piece that is in the law is that the copy of the draft IEP shall become property of the parents. I know Carol and I have spoken to y'all about this new rule coming, because we expected it in November and now it's coming in March. I'm going to give you the backstory briefly on how we got here. One of our neighboring counties had an IEP meeting, parents participated, and parents got a draft IEP. Parent decided to take that draft IEP home. Parent was stopped by the principal, parent was stopped by the SRO out in the parking lot. and the draft IEP was physically taken from the parent. Luckily, that's not us. So that's how lawyers will say bad facts sometimes make bad law. Bad facts sometimes make rules for everybody. So that is why in our new rule it says, copy of the draft of the IEP shall become the property of the parents. I can't believe that we have anybody that works for our district that would take a draft from a parent, but it's in there just in case. Okay, here is your role. 2 things I want you to remember: March 12th, 2019, and LEA, that's going to be you or your assistant principal. Here's what you're going to need to do at the beginning of the IEP meeting. There's going to be language that the Department of Education will give us. We have not seen the language yet, but there will be language. You don't have to memorize this. But you are going to have to remind the team this is a draft. It is a starting point. It's not a completed IEP. And that these are preliminary recommendations for review and discussion with the parents. So again, when we have the sheet where we have gone through procedural safeguards, on our minutes, we're gonna have, again, a checkbox, that language, but as LEA, that is you or your assistant principal's responsibility at the beginning of all of the IEP team meetings.
Draft IEPs. The question is, what makes a draft? And TDOE has defined this very specifically. If you have touched any single piece of data in EdPlan on the workspace that is currently available in the workspace, if you change one date, one phone number, one word, one anything, you have a new draft. Also, some teachers draft like present levels on a Word document. And then they copy and paste it into EdPlan because it's easier to draft on a Word document. So several people do that I know of. If they have done that, we have a draft, even if they don't put it in EdPlan. We have a draft. So that is, what is a draft? Any change that they put into EdPlan in preparation, or any documents that have been collected and synthesized into some language to drop into EdPlan, that is a draft. So anything that your school staff are preparing, those are drafts.
So as a practical piece, when Carol and I met with the special education teachers in January, we talked about in this scenario, parent does not opt out, so we have to provide the draft within 48 hours. We notify team members saying the draft has gone home, do not make any more changes. And one of the team members realizes there is incorrect information. A PLEP is wrong. Data is wrong in the IEP. What do? They print out a copy, they write those personal notes in, they bring those notes to the IEP team, we make those changes as a team. Probably what is often happening anyway. I've sat in enough, as y'all have, IEP meetings to know that we come in with a draft, but that we make changes as a team sitting in the meeting. So we can still make those changes, just not after that 48 hours in Easy IEP. Okay, third piece I want you to be sure that you come away with, March 12th, 2019, 48 hours, what your role is an administrator. This happens, the 48 hours, when WCS calls the meeting, not a parent-requested meeting. So if we have called the meeting, this is when the 48 hours kicks in. So if it is a parent-called meeting that gets continued, and then the second meeting is a parent-called meeting. Draft 48-hour rule is not in effect. This is what happens, and we've all had these. We have a parent meeting, they have a concern, we come in, we don't have to present them with a draft 48 hours before. We have a second meeting because they're not done with all of their concerns. Still a parent meeting, don't have to give them the draft. What happens with that third meeting? We are close to compliance time, so it changes from parent called meeting to actually a WCS meeting. We need that meeting for compliance reasons. At that point, we have to provide them with a draft IEP, okay? So they can indicate whether or not they want a copy if one is developed. Now this is one thing that we talked about with our special educators. Meetings are gonna get really, really long if we don't develop a draft IEP. That is an option to be in compliance. If there's not a draft, obviously, we cannot provide it. That is really not our recommendation, other than an initial. But our recommendation is make the changes after that 48 hours. Nobody gets in it, nobody touches it. If we need to make changes as a team, we do that. If you have not heard from the parent and a draft has begun that you're going to bring to the team, you've got to send it home. So if the parents don't communicate back, you've got to send it home 48 hours before. Because remember, this is about parent participation.
IEP meetings and amendments. Again, unless the parent waives the right to the draft, we send it, whether we hear from them or not. We are sitting at an IEP team meeting and it's a new eligibility. That's going to have an entirely different process now. The only way you can develop an IEP now is have a draft prepared for the parent 48 hours in advance, or you can sit at the IEP team meeting and prepare every aspect of that IEP in the meeting. Those are the only two options.
Again, the second option probably is not going to be our recommendation. We're just telling you that is how you can be compliant. How draft IEPs were provided to parents or guardians. So, drafts, we've got two ways to deliver them. Either picked up in your front office. Carol has a form, for a signature form that will be sent out to everyone. So put it in an envelope, stick it in the front office. Remember, the rule says we have to make it available, okay? And I'm putting a little emphasis on that because the next question is, what if the parent doesn't come pick it up? We have made it available to the parent. It may be that it sits for 48 hours in the front office. At the meeting, we hand it to them. On the form that we've developed, you're going to see the date of the meeting at the top, as well as the date we made it available to the parent. You know, in special ed, we love our record keeping. This is going to be one more record that we're going to have to keep. If the parent requests then this is what I anticipate happening once our parents learn they can get the draft IEP. They're going to say, email it to me. We are going to want an email from the parent requesting it sent by email. That has a lot to do with FERPA. It has a lot to do with guidance that we've recently received from the Department of Education that has nothing to do with special ed and the 48-hour draft rule. But because of that, I want a paper trail that they have asked us to do that, and then we're sending it that way. If we are sending it via email, still need the records kept, which states, print out from the sent folder. Here it is, I've attached it, and then we've got that, that we've actually sent it. In addition, in the contacts tab in EdPlan, where we have asked all of our file holders to document any attempts that they have made, because again, we have to make it available. So it doesn't have to be delivered. Obviously, we want it delivered because we want parent participation, but we all know there's going to be some parents who aren't going to come pick up. So we want to document that. And I've got it in there one more time. After we've sent it home, nobody touches the draft IEP.
So your special ed teachers were most concerned about that statement. No one can touch the draft after it has been printed to send to the parents. No one. So that means the OT who doesn't come to your school every day, they can't sit at another school and change the draft after it has been printed. So we gave our teachers some advice that I think is probably good. The file holder should really send an email to all the members of the team saying, I printed the IEP draft for the parent, please make no changes. Okay? They can't touch it after 48 hours. I will tell you, I did ask TDOE and PCG, who owns EdPlan, to see if they could lock the IEP after we printed. They told me it was impossible. They went back and checked, and they said that's not possible.
We have alluded to this slide, but I'm going to hit it one more time, and I'm going to start with an exception. For my elementary principals who have EC, the EC portion, this will not apply, but for everyone else, initial IEP meetings, if we've got an initial, we are not going to draft a draft IEP until we have determined eligibility, because that can be seen as predetermination. Because obviously, as a team, we are making that eligibility determination. So you can, after determination has been determined, you can develop that initial IEP at the eligibility meeting, or reconvene within 30 calendar days. That piece is going, like I said, is going to be different for EC. I know that Nancy Medlin has trained her EC special educators so that they all know how we want to handle EC initial eligibilities.
Again, this is a practical tip that we shared with our staff. You are now going to have 2 meetings for a new eligibility student unless you're developing the entire IEP in the presence of the entire team, which would make for a long IEP meeting. That is not our suggestion. We would prefer for some drafts to be developed. But what I would like to see happen is after the eligibility is determined and the family is sitting there at the table, your team right then identifies the next date for the IEP meeting, and if possible, can we generate an IEP meeting notice, an invitation to the parent before they leave, so we have the date already identified, and you can find out at that point whether the parent wants a draft and whether they're going to pick it up or whether they're going to email it. But we do need those documents signed, okay? Signed if they're picking it up, and a copy of the email from the parent saying, please email it to me. But identify that date at the eligibility meeting.
Okay, and one last practical tip that we gave to all of our special educators: communicate with the parents early and often, because as we know, this is going to be a change in how we are doing business. There is nothing wrong with communicating with the families to find out what their preferences are and going ahead and having those discussions early. And having those discussions often until our parents are familiar with this new rule and how we are doing business.
We are not developing a form to send home to all parents that says, email me my documents. We're not doing that. We need each individual IEP decision made for each meeting. and the parent has to tell you whether they're going to pick it up or whether they want it emailed.